Okay, Shavua Tov. This week, as advertised, we're doing Psalm 137, and it's. I don't know if anyone remembers, but or earlier in the year, I mentioned that generally the Psalms that I like the best are the Psalms which have a more somber tone to them. Especially when King David is praying for something specifically because he's dealing with some difficulty. So this week and next week, we're doing exceptions to that rule. The exception this week is, this is a sad poem I don't like. And next week, we're doing a happy poem, which I do like. So next week, it's like last week we did the happy poem, which we sing when we bench, when we say Birchat HaMazon, on days when we don't say Tachanun, on relatively speaking joyous days. And today we're doing the poem that we recite on days when we would say Tachanun, on relatively somber days. And next week, I want to do Psalm 122 with you, which specifically expresses joy about Yerushalayim. And so I want to do that next week in honor of Yom Yerushalayim. And so that's going to be what we're doing. But now let's get going on Al Narot Bavel. And I have to get going because I want to finish it today. 122. 122. One of my favorite lines in, I mean, it's got a lot of beautiful lines. L'ma'an achai v'reya and irsha chubralal yachtav. It's great stuff. Next week's beautiful. If you're going to miss it.
They say that's the one you say Tehillim, the Kol Yom of the month.
Right.
That comes out on, I think, Yom Kafet of the month.
Oh, really?
Right.
But it makes sense. It makes sense because it's toward the end of Tehillim and it's toward the end of the month. Oh, that's very nice. By the way, we'll talk about this next week, but Rav Shlomo Aviner from Beit El has a beautiful idea that Chavchet Iyar, which is Yom Yerushalayim, of course, for us, was the date when Yehoshua beat the Amalekites in the desert, just before they got to Har Sinai. So the day that we have Yom Yerushalayim is a historically joyous day in Jewish history. But okay, we'll talk about that next week. Now let's get into the sad situation of the Jews in Bavel. Now, the greatest controversy about this poem, although there are a couple of controversies, but the greatest controversy about this poem is who wrote it. And of course, we know the Midrash claims that every poem in Tehillim, which isn't attributed, there are poems that say B'nai Korach and things of that nature. If it's not attributed, it was written by David HaMelech. Now, we definitely believe that David HaMelech wrote the majority of the Psalms, but not this one. Even though the Midrash says he did, and that what he's writing about is Nevuah. A lot of Meforshim are against that. The Malbim is very much against that position and says it goes against everything we know about Nevuah because he's so specific and he'd be prophesying more than one event. But we'll see how it unfolds. According to most Meforshim, this poem was written by Leviim, who were in Bavel in the Galut, and you'll see why that makes sense in just 1 second. So the poem begins right away, Al Naharot Bavel, by the rivers of Babylon. There's an English song, By the Rivers of Babylon, based on this, of course. I'll do you the favor and not sing it. But the question is, whenever they talk about the rivers of Babylon, the first idea that pops into our heads, of course, is the Tigris and Euphrates. The two great rivers of Bavel. But a lot of Meforshim say it doesn't have to be those great rivers. It more likely is a tremendous network of canals that were built in very early times to connect the two rivers and to irrigate the entire Mesopotamian valley. And so we don't know, but they're sitting by rivers. And rivers, of course, are a source of water. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe says that it's very important that the poem begins saying they were sitting by these sources of water as opposed to sitting in Yerushalayim when the source of water is Torah, because Ein Mayim Ela Torah. So in other words, they were getting their water from the rivers of Bavel rather than getting their water and sustenance from Torah. And they felt it. Sham Yashavnu. There we sat. There we were settling in some way. Gam Bachinu. We're sitting there and we're crying. We're sitting by these rivers and saying, we don't want to be here. Other people would sit by these rivers and say, wow, the Middle East doesn't have much water, and here they've got plenty. Isn't this a wonderful place to be? And we sat there and said, no, we don't want to be here. We don't want to be here because our water, our sustenance should be coming from Eretz Yisrael and should be coming from Torah. So we sat there and we cried. And the thing that motivated us to cry was Bizachrenu et Zion, when we remembered Zion. Okay. Now, we've talked about this before. When we say Zion, what do we mean? What do we mean when we use the expression Zion? And this is a term that changed its meaning over time. Apparently, Zion was a place in Yerushalayim, either the highest place or a palace or a fortification. And then it came to mean, in the time of David Melech, all of Yerushalayim. And then in the time of Shivat Zion, in the time of Ezra, it came to mean the entire area that the Jews settled, which in those days, the area they settled was Judea. So it would mean all of Judea, and eventually, in the 19th century, we extended that idea to mean all of Eretz Israel. Now, let's be honest. When you're talking about Judea, that's a really small area. In other words, when the Jews return from Bavel, they have a sort of circular piece of property that was Yerushalayim in the middle, and perhaps about 20 kilometers in each direction. Perhaps a little bit more north and south. Was more of more of egg shape rather than exactly circular. But Yerushalayim is in the middle, and it's not that much area north and south, extending down to Beit Lechem and extending into the area controlled by Binyamin previously. But it's not that much area, and they called it Zion because it's dominated by Yerushalayim. What does it mean by Zion here? Like everything else, there's an argument. A lot of Meforshim say it means Jerusalem. It wouldn't mean all of Israel yet, because they're still in Bavel. But a lot of Meforshim say Zion meant to them the Beit HaMikdash, because we're assuming that the authors are Leviim. And the reason we make that assumption is in the next pasuk. And what happens in the next pasuk? They're sitting by the river. Well, yeah, please, Jay.
Do you think there's any meaning in the fact it says Gam Bachinu instead of Vim Bachinu?
Yeah, the idea of Gam is saying that it goes against what we normally think of Yeshavnu. I'm glad you asked. I wasn't going to say it, but it's a good question. Because usually Yeshavnu has a concept in it of something positive. Yeshavnu, we settled, we were relatively in peace, and they were. The situation was peaceful, but nevertheless, we were crying. Even though we were in a settled situation, you think, good, we survived the war, we're in, the Babylonian version of a DP camp, right? Over there, but they're well taken care of, especially the higher ups in the Jewish society, which we did very well. That included Kohanim and Leviim. Nevertheless, so the Gam was sitting there, and it's got a sort of like nevertheless shot to it. We're sitting there, and we're also crying, even though you'd expect us not to be crying. That's why it's not Viv. That's a good, excellent question. But we're sitting next to a river. Excuse me. What grows next to rivers? It was in yesterday's parsha. Aravim, Arvei Nachal. Next to rivers grow willow trees. So we're sitting there, and there are willow trees. And willow trees, when you look at them and they're drooping, they add to our sense of depression. I mean, in English, we quite often call them weeping willows, okay? We don't know what kind of willow it is. The weeping willow was really not kosher for the Aravot on Sukkot, but it's definitely in the family of Aravim, so it could have been a weeping willow, and that just adds to the depression of the situation, even though they're beautiful trees. So Aravim betocha, in this neighborhood, by the river, there are these willow trees. And what do we do on those willow trees? Talino kino rotenu. We hung our, I'm not sure what the correct translation is, whether it's harp or lyre. I don't know the difference anyways between them. Okay. Definitely doesn't mean violin. Okay. In modern Hebrew, we say a kinur is a violin. Doesn't mean violins. And this, of course, is the support for the position that we're talking about Leviim, because the musicians in the Beit HaMikdash were the Leviim. So what happens is we have retired from music because we've lost our inspiration. Our inspiration was Tzion. Without Tzion, whether Tzion is all of Yerushalayim or just the Beit HaMikdash, makes no difference. Without our inspiration, we can't play. We're crying. But sometimes even when you cry, you play your violin or you play your, did you ever hear Yitzchak Perlman play the theme from Schindler's List? The violin's crying, So they could have played sad music, but even that they couldn't do. They couldn't put their fingers to the strings of their harp, lyre, whatever instrument it is. Okay? And we're going to add to this, people knew who they were. Now, did these Levium wear special garments, or was it that they saw them sitting near the harp, so they saw them put the harps up? But people knew that these were the Levium. And so therefore we get to verse Gimel. Now, Aleph, Bet, Gimel all work together. They're setting the scene for the Jews, specifically the Levium, but the Jews in Bavel. Kisham, that there by the riverside, with our harp hanging from the tree in retirement, right? It's like I hung up my spikes. If you're a baseball player, I hung up my spikes. Okay? Kisham she'elunu shovenu. And there our captors, those who had brought us there, those people that caused us to sit by this river. That's why, the use of the terminology it's parallel. There we sat. And we sat there because these people made us sit there. So those people that made us sit there came over and asked us. It's like the chutzpah of these people. They came over to us and they asked, Divrei Shir, could you sing us a song? What an unbelievable request that we couldn't possibly do. By the way, there are stories like this in the Holocaust. Yeah, not just Theresienstadt, but that's the most famous because they had a real orchestra and choir there. But in other places, that there were people that they knew were musicians that were forced to play music during different times. But of course, the most famous was Theresienstadt, where they actually formed an orchestra. So there, I mean, they played because if they didn't play, they'd be killed. The Jews were treated better than that in Bavel. Baruch Hashem for them, okay? But they came over and said, oh, sing us a song. We'd love to hear. We've heard how musically talented you people are. Sing us a song. V'tolalenu, those who put us in this position. Tolalenu, those who, the translation in Unclus is bazaznu, those who plundered us. Those who, what translation do you have? Do you see what's I'm sorry? Oh, that's in Dutch. I'm sorry. Okay, I should look. I have a translation. I'm just curious. Tolalenu. What's Tolalenu? Those who oppressed us, those who plundered us, those who captives is Shovenu. The next verb. What's the next noun? Shovenu is our captors. The next one is. Oh, it's not important. Okay. Those who plundered from us our joy, took away our joy. No, it's not important. Plunder is fine. That's unclus. Okay? And so they said, Shiru lanu misher Tzion. Sing us a song of Zion. Sing us a song. So that's the first part. I'm sorry? According to that, it's a musical instrument? Really?
According to Rashi, Tolal is a
Unclus says it's
a musical instrument.
Bazaznu, those who here it translates as tormentors. Tormentors here. Okay? Those who tormented us. Yeah, interesting. V'tolalenu simcha. And for the simcha, for the joy of our tormentors, or plunderers, those who took everything from us. What did they say? Shira lanu mishir Tzion. Sing for us a song of Zion. Entertain us. Yeah. Okay. So that's the beginning. And that's how they began their time. They were terribly depressed, unable to do anything. The next three verses are a slightly later time. And it begins with a response to those people. And it says, Eich nashir et shir Hashem al admat nechar. How can we sing a song of God? In other words, our music is a religious ceremony. It's a religious obligation. How can we don't know any music that isn't God's music? We don't know. You don't know popular songs. By the way, there's an argument between Reb Moshe and Reb Ovadia Yosef, Aleichem HaShalom, about music. Can you use Gentile music in shul? And Reb Moshe said you can use Gentile music as long as it wasn't church music. Unless it was used in a non-Jewish, as a church or mosque, doesn't make a difference, unless it was used in non-religious services. But if it's just like a popular song, you can, and we know people sing Adon Olam, all sorts of songs that are popular. That's Reb Moshe. Reb Ovadia said you can use any music, even if it was used in a church or mosque or whatever. And he said, because all music comes from the Levium. The Levium invented music. And so even though throughout history, it may have been used by other people, it all goes back to our music. There's no such thing as music that wasn't from the Levium. And so they say, how can we, this is their response. And now we have what they are promising. They're taking basically 3 oaths. And these oaths we continue to take today. This is the oath we take at a wedding. This is an oath that many people have said when they leave Eretz Yisrael. There are people that while they're sitting on the plane will say these 2 verses, this oath, which is, Im eshkachech Yerushalayim. If I should forget you, Jerusalem. Notice change in language. They've been in Bavel longer time now. When you're in Bavel longer, you don't use the term Tzion because Tzion is more affectionate, more descriptive. Once you're away from town for a while, you call it Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, which is the more formal name of the city. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, tishkach yemini, my right hand should forget how to do things. Now, I take offense at this because I'm a lefty. but yemini means my stronger hand. In other words, sometimes they'll say in halacha, yemino shelo, use your own right hand. So for me, my yamin is what other people call left. Okay, I just wanted to get in there. What did they? Yeah, please. If he was a lefty, right? He had to learn to be right-handed to serve as a Kohen. As a Kohen, I'm not sure that's true of Levium.
But aren't we normal human beings taught not to switch? If I'm a lefty, not to try.
That's now. It used to be. My father, Oliver Shalom, was forced. He was born a lefty. He was forced to use his right hand when he was in first grade. He was in public school. He was in the first grade. This is in Boston. We're talking 1915, 1916, a long time ago. When he was in the first grade, if he picked up his pencil with his left hand, the teacher came over with a metal ruler and hit his hand. Yeah. And they thought that was the right thing to do. By the way, in many armies, they don't allow lefties.
Well, you might not have.
Because in terms of synchronizing the movement, they want everybody to have the sword in the right hand. By the way, when I was taught how to shoot, I was in Shlav Bet. They didn't want to spend much time with us. I was an older person when I went into the army. They taught everybody to shoot right-handed. And they said, we're not going to bother with the lefties. Everybody do it this way. So I learned how to shoot right-handed.
So you learned how to shoot.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way they taught us. What did they do with their right hand that they're going to forget how to do it? That's the Kohen. What did the Levium do with their left, with their right? Right. Remember that harp that they hung on the tree? If I forget Jerusalem, may I forget how to play that harp. May I forget how to use my right hand. Now, we use this sentence in a more general meaning. May I forget all things that I can do with my right hand. But the original pshat, the original meaning of the verse is, the Levium, may I forget how to use my right hand, which is what they used for plucking the harp. They would hold the instrument with their left hand. I'm doing it backwards. They would hold the instrument with their left hand, and they would pluck the strings with their right hand. So if I forget Jerusalem, but what do you see here? They're playing the instruments again. This is later than the first 3 verses. They're playing the instruments, they're using instruments, but they're not forgetting Jerusalem. And goes on to the next verse. V'tidbak l'shoni l'chiki, may my tongue get glued. They usually say cleave, but get glued to my palate. Imlo ez karechi, if I don't remember you. What did they do with their tongues and their mouths? They they sang. So may I forget how to play my harp, and may I forget how to sing my songs if I can't keep in the back of my mind Yerushalayim. In other words, my motivation, my motivation, I feel like this is Stanislavski teaching people how to be actors, right? You need motivation, right? So what's your motivation? For these musicians, the singers, their motivation is Yerushalayim, the Beit HaMikdash, Avodat Hashem. That's their motivation. Im lo a'aleh et Yerushalayim. If I don't literally bring up, a'aleh, olah, bring up. If I don't bring up Jerusalem, but here it means bring up in the sense of conversation, music, mentioning, al rosh simchati, at the top, at the head of my joy. Now you have to understand these three verses, they've been in Bavel a little bit. I don't know how long, but they're having smachot. I mean, that's inevitable. People get married. According to a UN statistical report, I think from WHO or whatever, World Health Organization, whatever it was, in 1949, the highest birth rate in the world was in the DP camps in Europe. Because people were quickly getting married. Either they found their spouse, unfortunately that was rare. Generally they got married. They got married and immediately wanted to have children to replace. When you think about it, there's no greater expression of emunah than that. So even in Bavel, they had smachot. People got married. Babies were born. So there were smachot. They're not in the first three verses. The first three verses, they first got there. And they would just, they didn't have to motivate themselves. They didn't have to make an oath about remembering Yerushalayim because it was still fresh in their minds. But when you get to Daled Hey Vav, the middle of the poem, by this time, it could have happened that people forgot Yerushalayim. How could that happen? Well, Yirmiyahu tells us. If you look in Yirmiyahu chapter 29, I'm just going to read it in English, just so it's faster, okay? This is the text of the letter which the prophet Jeremiah sent from Yerushalayim to the priests, prophets, and the rest of the elders of the exile community in Bavel. He sent them a letter, okay? And what did it say in the letter? Verse 4, chapter 29, verse 4. Thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to the whole community, which I, God, exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses, live in them, plant gardens, and eat their fruit. Take wives and beget sons and daughters. And take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there. Do not decrease. In other words, they were told by Yirmiyahu, by God, through Yirmiyahu. He sent them a letter saying, settle down and live. That's after the first three verses. First three verses, they were just going to sit by the riverside and cry until they died. But then they get this letter, or life continues. Then you get Daled Hey Vav. We can't just sing your songs. We have to remember Yerushalayim. We're going to have a simcha. But we have to remember Yerushalayim at HaSimcha. And of course, what do? Rosh Simchati. When the Chatan and Kala are going to go to Yichud, they're at the height of their joy, we sing, Im Eshkachech Yerushalayim. We follow the instructions of our oath. We keep our oath. And many people put ashes on their forehead. Now I put ashes on my forehead from just a little piece of paper. Okay? Just tiny bit, okay, as like a reminder. But my youngest daughter, when she got married here in Yerushalayim, my son-in-law had a friend who was an archaeologist, and he was working on the dig at Area G in outside the old city by Ir David, and there was wood there that was burnt in 586 BCE. That was burnt at the time when the whole city was burnt, when Yerushalayim and the temple were destroyed. And my son-in-law's friend stole 2 tiny pieces of charcoal from the wood, and my son and son-in-law were wearing that. It was a tiny. My daughter and son-in-law, thank you. My daughter, Shani, was and a tiny. It was. I saw it. It was a tiny, tiny piece. It had already been removed because it was part of a sample that was sent to a laboratory. He didn't take it himself. It was part of a sample that was sent to a laboratory, and they for the carbon dating, which confirmed that it was from the 6th century BCE. And they were wearing that, and it was very, very touching, very, very moving to think about that. We even now, even in Yerushalayim, we stay connected with the Chorban. We don't forget it. We don't forget it. So we've got 2 things going on in the poem. The first part of the poem is the initial arrival in Bavel. Okay? The second part of the poem is a little bit during the time after they followed the instructions from Yirmiyahu and they got back to regular life. Now, we know the truth. Even though Yirmiyahu specifically told them that the exile would only be 70 years, that was part of his nevuah, we know that when the time came to go back, when Koresh, Cyrus, conquered Bavel and gave the Jews license to return, we know the vast majority didn't. Something like 75, 80% of the Jews stayed in Bavel. Because when they followed these instructions, sadly, they prospered. And it was very hard. It was very hard to leave. And that's what happened. So, did they keep the oath? We don't know. We don't know. Some people did keep the oath because there were Jews that stayed Jewish, but we know some people didn't keep the oath because there were Jews that assimilated in Bavel. There was a huge Jewish population in Bavel, and later it was a small population when other people went a couple of centuries later during the Greek period to visit Bavel. So that's what's going on in the middle section. Now we get to the final 3 verses, the final section of the poem, which is written, as you can see, in the future tense. Now, I want to point out one more thing before I go on. The first 3 verses are written in the first person plural. Everybody felt this way, right? Everything, Yashavnu, Bachinu, Zacharnu, everything is in the first person plural. Everybody felt this way when we first got to Bavel. When you look at verse 4, 5, well, Dalet is still a continuation, even though it's in the second section. It says Nashir still, but then it says Eshkachech, singular, first person singular. Yemini, Ezkarechi, Lishoni, because once you get to the middle part of the poem, not everybody's on board. X number of the Jews have already assimilated, and the commitment to remember Yerushalayim was no longer necessarily a communal commitment. It was a personal commitment. So there's a tremendous sadness that's going on. What? I'm sorry? No, that's very sad. You would wish that the middle part would also be in the first person plural. I underlined certain words, as you can see, in the first 2 sections of the poem that doesn't appear in the 3rd section. We have shir, simcha, shiru, shir, nashir, shir, simchati. There's a juxtaposition going on. The status of the author or authors is they're very sad, but they're talking about what they're missing. They're missing music. They're missing joy. They're missing their profession in the temple. So in other words, by harping, if I can use that expression in our context, okay, by harping on positive terminology, we get an ironic juxtaposition that they don't have shir, they don't really have simcha. But some, of course, by the end, some do. And then we get to the third part of the poem. The third part of the poem is the more distant future, and it's a prayer to Hashem. And it begins, look, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I just promised, I just made an oath to remember. So with that oath in mind, Hashem, I turn to you, capital Y, and I say, Zechor Hashem. I'm remembering how much more so I expect you, Hashem, to remember. Okay? Remember what specifically? B'nai Edom. Now, why do we mention Edom first? In a minute, we're going to mention Bavel. But why Edom first? Something bothered the Jews very much about the destruction of the temple. And it's referred to by Ovadia. Ovadia is only one chapter long. But Ovadia talks about Edom and our relationship with these descendants of Esau, our cousins. And he says in verse 5, if thieves were to come to you, marauders by night, they would steal no more than they needed. Okay? But that's not true of Esau. When Esau comes, they just wipe out everything. In other words, part of the utter destruction of Jerusalem was the participation of our southern neighbors, Edom, in the destruction. Normal people just do what's necessary to either win the war or get what they need, but not you guys. You guys utterly destroyed everything. There was a wanton sense of pillage and destruction on the part of Edom. So in the plea for revenge at the end of the poem, there's a special section for Edom. That's pshat. Now let's go back to the Midrash. The Midrash says that King David wrote the poem, and the entire poem was written with prophecy. If that's true, if the poem is prophetic, who's Edom? Rome. Which means that this line, this verse 7, is a reference to the second destruction. That's not pshat, but it's a very powerful midrash because we have always identified Rome with Edom, and then from the descendants of Rome, the Roman Catholic Church with Edom. So bearing that in mind, the verse 7 has this sort of double entendre in it. It's got this double whammy going on. It was their first, the real Edomites, historical, genetic Edomites, that really were the most vicious attackers during the destruction of Jerusalem. 8 Yom Yerushalayim. Now for us, there's a certain irony that they called the day of Tisha B'Av Yom Yerushalayim. Excuse me. For us, that's very ironic because we call Yom Yerushalayim the day of the reunification. For us, it's the joyous reconquest of Yerushalayim in 1967. We call Yom Yerushalayim. But they refer to the destruction, Tisha B'Av, the double destruction of Yerushalayim. That was the day of Jerusalem, which will in the future be a joyous day, but is still, for us, very sad. Ha'omrim, what did the Edomites say? Aru, Aru, ad hayesod ba. Totally raze it, destroy it, until even the foundations are no longer recognizable. According to the Midrash, this refers to Rome. When Bavel destroyed the temple, they didn't raise it all the way down to bedrock, to the foundations. They didn't destroy it because when the Jews came back 70 years later and built the second temple, they knew exactly where to do it because they had remnants. Today, we've got nothing. That's why there are arguments about where you can go on Har HaBayit. Because the Romans, like is referenced in this verse, the Romans totally wiped out any memory of where the building stood. Now we have opinions, but we're not sure. And that's why the Midrash says we're going to require Nevuah, specifically Eliyahu HaNavi, to tell us where to build the third temple. And of course, Rashi says we're not going to build the third temple. It's going to come down from Shemayim because we don't know how to do it. That's like an even more complicated version of this Midrash that we don't know where it goes and we don't know how to do it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to do it. But again, in the Pshat, it's just saying that Bnei Edom were the most fierce of the attackers who allied themselves with Bavel. Now, we know, when there's, these kinds of family feuds are really, the most vicious, and that was true and is being referenced in verse Zion. Okay. Bat Bavel, the daughter, the descendants of Bavel, Hashaduda, the bandit, the destroyer, okay? A shoded is specifically a pirate. I'm sorry? Plunderer. Those who just take everything. Pirates are shoded yam, okay? A shoded. So Bat Bavel, the descendants of Bavel, who are plunderers, who are destroyers, what do we say about them? Ashrei sheyishalem lach. Fortunate, or even happy. I think fortunate. The people that are going to make you pay. Who's that, by the way? Persia. Cyrus. Persia is the reference here. Those who are going to make you pay are going to be fortunate. Now you have to understand, overall, our relationship with Persia was positive. I know there's the Purim story, which turns out okay, but in the middle looks bad. But overall, our relationship with Persia, and it lasted from 536 BCE. It lasted until the Greeks came to Eretz Yisrael in about 330. So it lasted for 200 years. We had a very good relationship with Persia, and so fortunate. I'm sorry? Iran today. We had a good relationship till 79, right? Ashrei, fortunate is going to be whoever it is that makes you pay for what you did. At Gemulech. Now this term Gemul is of course a technical term in Judaism. When Yosef Albo wrote his famous book of Ikarim, of essential beliefs of Judaism, he said we have to believe in three things. We have to believe that there is a God who cares about this world, a God who's active, not a deist, distant God. We have to believe in Nevuah and the Epiphany at Sinai, Torah Min Shemayim, and we have to believe in Gemul. What is Gemul? Payoff. Good translation, actually. It's better than what I was going to say. Gemul means a system of reward and punishment, but it means payoff. That there's a payoff. So, at Gemul Lech, Shegamalt lanu. You're going to get what you gave to us. It's going to be mida keneged mida. Which brings us to the most difficult pasuk in the poem. A pasuk that I have to be honest, even when I read the poem, I often skip. I just find it too disturbing. But we're saying whoever it is that comes to get you is going to be just as nasty as you were to us. You're going to get full measure of what you gave. That's gemul. Gemul literally means an action, like gemilas chesed, an act of kindness, right? It means an act. But the connotation of the term, the concept behind the term is this concept of payback, payoff. Measure for measure. Mida keneged mida. Which brings us to the last line. Ashrei, fortunate. These people are in a good position. Sheyochez v'nifetz et olalayach elasela. I have difficulty with this, but the line in the poem is here because the Babylonians did it to our children. So part of the gemul is their children will be grabbed and be smashed against Sela, is good-sized rocks. In other words, exactly what you did is going to happen to you. It's difficult. It's not something that we would do.
It's not necessarily us.
No, it wasn't us. It was the Persians. It's not us. It's not us. It's without question. It's not us. Okay? But we're saying that there is a certain reward. That's the Ashrei. There's a certain reward for those who give back to you exactly what you gave to us. And it will include this level of cruelty, of brutality. And there are a reference this in Yeshayahu that this would happen to Jewish children. There's a long midrash that's quoted in the Gemara as well, part of it, about children being killed brutally by the Babylonians at the time of the first temple, and that's this reference. That's this reference. It happened to us, and therefore it's going to happen to you. So the poem again has three parts. One was when they immediately got to Bavel. The second is as they were settling into Bavel. And the third is this future hope for the redemption as the time in Bavel was stretching out and they felt, we need divine intervention, Zechor Hashem, to get us out of this. And that's what's going on in the poem. And when you read Birchat HaMazon on sad days, you're supposed to feel bad because Birchat HaMazon is thanking Hashem for giving us Eretz HaTovah, this good land. And we're asking God to rebuild Yerushalayim. So we remember at the beginning the destruction and how bereaved we are without Yerushalayim, without Eretz Yisrael. And so it's a difficult poem. It's not a pleasant poem, but it's an important poem. It's an important poem to describe. The most important, for me, the most important part of the poem has become the most famous part of the poem. This oath to always remember Eretz Yisrael, to always remember Yerushalayim, because when we don't keep that oath, we also don't remain Jewish. When we don't keep this oath, sadly, that's who gets assimilated. And we've seen this sadly throughout history. Even if you don't make Aliyah, that commitment to Eretz Yisrael, that commitment to rebuilding the land and Yerushalayim, that's what has historically kept connection not just to Yerushalayim, but to Judaism and to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to Hashem. So even though it's a difficult poem, it's a very, very important poem. Much more pleasurable next week. Much more pleasurable next week, Psalm 122. A happy and very, very beautiful, beautiful poem that we'll take a look at. Best of the show. I'm sorry? Today is Pesach Sheni, correct. So it's actually a day on which you don't recite this poem, because we don't say Tachanan today. Yeah, you're right. I should have actually mentioned, we actually don't recite this poem today, because it is Pesach Sheni. Okay. Everyone should have a wonderful week, and Bezrat Hashem, see you next week.
Thank you so much.
137, I used to recite it